This week's Parsha is Parashat Noach. We will also be discussing ideas from Parashat Bereshit. And the reason why is because Parashat Noach kind of begins in the middle of things. Last week's Parsha was actually a prologue to this week's Parsha. We see Noach is introduced. We see what happened with the world, right? How it was deteriorating and how it led into Parashat Noach. Now, this idea is, of course, based on the Torah I heard from Rav Bernstein. And here's how he starts. He starts with chapter 6, verse 3. That's the end of Parashat Bereshit, and says like this: Vayomer Hashem lo yadon ruchi v'adam lo'olam v'shagam hu basar v'hayu yamav 120 shana. So that term v'shagam hu basar is a strange term, and that's kind of where we're going to pick up the discussion. So just as a translation, it says, and Hashem said, my spirit shall not contend evermore concerning man, right? God's not happy with how things are going. And it says, Bishagam hu basar, shouldn't use but flesh, but again, strange expression. His days shall be 120 years. So God is giving us 120 years of courtesy to kind of shape up. Now, this expression, Bishagam hu basar, is the subject of this word, Bishagam hu basar, is the subject of a discussion in Chulin. The way that discussion begins is by quoting 3 figures from Nach: Haman, Esther, and Mordechai, and then leads into Moshe. So it asks, Haman mina Torah minayin. Where do we see Haman in the Torah? In Chamisha Chumsha, right? The 5 books of Moses. So it quotes Hamin ha'etz. Hamin ha'etz, that again is in Parashat Bereshit. It's after Adam ate from the fruit. God asks Hamin ha'etz, right? Did you eat from the tree? And then how about Esther? Esther mina Torah minayin. Haster Esther Panaim, it's a pasuk in Chumash Dvarim. How about Mordechai? Mordechai mina Torah minayin. So one of the ingredients of the Shem Mishcha, this is in Parashat Kitisa, is called Mara Deror, and the way that's translated in Onkelus is as Mara Dachia. So there you go, that's Mordechai. So we have Haman, we have Esther, we have Mordechai, very good. Then the Gemara asks, Moshe mina Torah minayin. Where do we see Moshe in the Torah? And the Gemara's answer is, Bishagam hu basar, right? This pasuk we just quoted at the end of Sefer Bereshit. Now, why? What's the connection between Bishagam and Moshe? Because the gematria, the numerical equivalent of Bishagam, is 345, and the numerical equivalent of Moshe's name is also 345. Aha! So you see, Moshe mina Torah minayin Bishagam. That is weird for at least 2 reasons. First, Moshe mina Torah minayin. Where do we find Moshe in the Torah? Okay, how about this? Open the Torah and look for him, and you'll find him everywhere. Virtually everywhere. Maybe not in Chumash Bereshit, but once you hit Shemot, right, Parashat Shemot, and you're introduced to Moshe, there's no getting away from him. He's virtually everywhere. He's in every single Parasha, and there's only one Parasha that does not contain Moshe once he's introduced, and it is noteworthy for the fact that it doesn't contain him. There are many Mefarshim who take up that question. Why isn't Moshe's name mentioned? Now, if that's true, and it is true, then why is the Torah asking, Moshe mina Torah minayin? Just look, open up the Chumash and you'll find him. And moreover, if you're going to identify a source, why Bishagam, right? You're giving gematrias. Gematrias are nice. But if you could have an actual source for his name, why are we counting on gematrias? That's our first question. Our second question is like this. So we go through the Mabul, and it's obviously not ideal. And then Noach and his family leaves the Teva, and then God starts giving them extra commandments. Now, what does he say? So there are 2 things. And this is in chapter 9, so just look at it inside, you'll see it. It says like this: God allows man now to eat meat. Meat is now permitted to you. You can eat from the flesh of animals, just like you were able to eat vegetation before, right? Fruits and vegetables, that's fine. You can eat animals. And then God says, you cannot murder. And if you do murder, you'll be killed. Why? What's the reason? So it says, chapter 9, verse 6, Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafech. A person who spills the blood of man, by man his blood will be spilled. Why? Ki betzelem Elokim asata adam. Because in the image of God, betzelem Elokim asata adam. That's how God made man. And betzelem Elokim. Okay, so how, again, just to reiterate the question, what do these 2 things, how are those the ultimate messages that we need to take away from the Mabul? Those are Rav Bernstein's questions. And now, to go on to the answers, we need to have a bit of background. So they were wiped out through this flood, and now we need to figure out, what did they do that was so wrong? Or is there anything specific? Is it more general in nature? And the answer is there are specifics. There was stealing, there was immorality, but the Mefarshim key in on the fact that it's not just the fact that they're stealing and immoral. That's not a good thing. But there's something else going on. It's the fact that they had lost their Tzelem Elokim. Man was created with Tzelem Elokim, and they had lost it. Now, it's important to realize that what is the Tzelem Elokim? If they lost it, we need to figure out what exactly it is. So, explains Rav Bernstein that actually, Tzelem Elokim refers to the unique human quality of asserting moral choices. That is to say, there are times when we'll want to do something, right? Our instincts point us one way, but a person is able to take a step back and be like, is it really so important for me to do X, or to eat Y, or to engage in certain behavior? And even though our instincts prompt us to do that, we're able to exercise our own human free will and to assert this is wrong. For example, even if it's not wrong, to at least try to assert some other value over this food. For example, when a person goes on a hunger strike, you will never see an animal go on a hunger strike. An animal lives only by instinct. If they're hungry, then they'll eat. Now, that's not to say sometimes they can be sad or depressed, right? If, say, their owner leaves and they're upset about it, then they won't eat. But eventually they'll crack, they'll eat. They're not going to say, I will not eat until my owner comes back. They can't do that. And even if they refuse to eat, it's not because they're asserting a conscious moral decision in a way that a human being does. What makes a human being is the fact that he's able to look at an object or to treat one of his instincts and overcome that instinct in asserting that moral choice. Now, if we look at the sins of the generation of the Mabul, what we see, the picture that emerges, is that they've lost their Tzelem Elokim. Why? Let's look at their sins. The sin of immorality. Right? The fact that there was widespread immorality. What does that mean? It's that they were behaving like an animal would. Right? They see something that they want and they act on it. There's no sense of restraint. There's no sense of loyalty. There's some animals that are actually more circumspect than how the people were acting back in the day. Some animals will actually be a little more proper, and they'll at least be more selective in terms of who they decide to be intimate with than the people were back in the day. So that's one. And the second one is that the world was full of Hamas. That's a very specific word. What does that mean? Of course, it's robbing, it's stealing, but it's robbing with violence. And Rav Bernstein is also careful to point out that if we look at Onkelos' translation, so Hamas, he doesn't say stealing. He actually says chatofim. They're a bunch of grabbers. So obviously, if you're grabbing something that's not yours, that's bad. But even if you're grabbing something that is yours, there's something that's loose, like animalistic about that. You're just grabbing. You just take things. You take what's yours. And so you see that through these two things, this immorality, this instinctual grabbing, they're just taking something that's not yours. Even if it is yours, there's just an inappropriate relationship with that. You've just they've lost their Tzelem Elokim. They're no longer acting in the way that was appropriate for a human being to act. That is the portrayal of the Dor HaMabul. Now, what's also fascinating is the fact that this Dor HaMabul was specifically destroyed by water. Now, just as a parenthetical, the Maharal actually discusses a very similar theme in Gittin. We're not going to go there tonight. I just thought when I heard Rav Bernstein talk about this, I was like, oh, Maharal and Gittin. I believe that's Nun Vav Amud Beis when Titus challenges HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But again, that's a different discussion. Anyway, so the Dor HaMabul was destroyed by flood through water. Now, what's interesting about water is that it is the epitome of that which is formless. It has no form. Right? It just takes the form of whatever's around it. And not only does it have no form, it actually wipes away any form that it comes into contact with. When people look at old sites, they'll be able to tell that this used to be the passageway for water because the rocks are all smooth. If you put a rock in it or virtually anything in it, it's just going to either smooth it out or just completely wear it away. It just dissipates. It destroys things. Just as an example, I once put jachnun into cholent, right? Into a liquid cholent. And someone told me, like, why did you do that? You should have put it into tinfoil. Why? You want to know what happened to that jachnun the very next day? It just completely dissipated into the cholent. There was nothing there because that's what water does. It just completely breaks things apart. And that actually is almost like a connected mida of what happened to the Dor HaMabul. The Dor HaMabul, they lost their Tzelem Elokim. They lost the divine image in which they had been formed. In that case, they'll become formless. And you know what's going to make them formless? That which has no form. That's the idea of the Mabul. But there was an exception. There was Noach. Right? Noach was not punished with the rest of mankind. Noach was doing okay. God saved Noach. Why? Because he had retained his Tzelem Elokim. And by seeing that, we see that once Noach is introduced, right, it's again right at the beginning of chapter 6, right, then just 3 verses in, what does God say? Vayomer Hashem, lo yadon ruchi v'adam l'olam v'shagam hu v'asar v'hayu yamav 120 shana, right? And Hashem said, my spirit shall not contend evermore concerning man, since he is but flesh, right? V'shagam hu v'asar, again, that the same verse that alludes us to Moshe, his days shall be 120 years. So we see that once we're introduced to Noach, right, a person who has retained his Tzelem Elokim, God is being more patient with people. He's like, no, I'll give them 120 years. But now that we've been introduced to Noach, we see an expression of how good a person can be. We want to figure out, okay, how much better can a person be than that? What's like the ultimate Tzelem Elokim? Okay, now, going to Moshe Rabbeinu, since this is the puzzle we're focusing on, Moshe Rabbeinu had many names. He had at least 10. And actually, there's a Rashi, I don't remember exactly where, that starts discussing all of the names of Moshe. And there are a lot of them. And yet, he's called Moshe. Why? What's the name Moshe? It's an allusion to Kimin HaMayim Meshitiu, right? He was drawn up from the water. That was the name given to him by Batia, right? Paro's daughter, because he was a little baby and he was in the basket floating down the river and he needed help. So it was an act of kindness. Now, says the Maharal in Gevurot Hashem, that's really nice that Moshe was drawn up from the water, but we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu here. Moshe did a lot of things, and some of them were extremely impressive, like giving the Torah to Israel, or striking Egypt with 10 plagues, or leading the Jews out of Egypt, or leading the Jews in the year for 40 years, or constantly vouching for the Jewish people and having them be forgiven for the sin of the Egel. The point is, there's no shortage of impressive feats that Moshe has accomplished. And you're naming him for Kimin HaMayim Meshitiu, for the fact that he was drawn out of water? He was a passive actor. He didn't even do anything. Now, of course, we can say, look, that shows you what Gemilut Chasadim is, how important it is. Right? Batia did an act of kindness for Moshe. And so we see that he's named that. That's still difficult. With all the respect to Gemilut Chasadim, and when we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu here, he did so much, and that's the name you're going to give him? Like, aren't there so many other things to Moshe? Why is he being called Moshe, right? Isn't that missing all of them? That's the Maharal's question. And says the Maharal, no, it's not missing all of them. By naming him Moshe, Kimin HaMayim Meshitiu, that's drawing on all of them. It is encapsulating all of his greatness. Why? Because if we see that Mayim is the antithesis of the Tzelem Elokim, then if you want to summarize the levels that Moshe reached, you can do it in 3 or 4 words. Kimin HaMayim Meshitiu. Moshe Rabbeinu is drawn up away from the water, away from that which is formless, because he is the ultimate Tzelem Elokim. That's why he's called Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, this helps us explain why the Gemara is looking for Moshe, right? When it says Moshe min Torah minayin, of course you can find Moshe. He's found it in Shemot and everywhere else. But the Gemara wants to know, where do we see him in the creation of man? If we're talking about the ultimate man, or like the person we ultimately want to be like, then that's why the Gemara is like, okay, Moshe min Torah minayin. Where can we see him in the creation of man? And there, in Parashat Bereshit, in the beginning of everything, where do we see him? B'shagam hu v'asar, in the exact same pasuk that gives all of humanity an extra 120 years to try to do better. You want to do better? Try to be as good as Moshe Rabbeinu. Here's where it all is. It's in this pasuk. Now, with all that understood, we go back to our parsha, back to Parashat Noach. We asked a question. Why is it that when Noach and his family left the Teva, right, they're given these commands, you are allowed to eat meat and you are prohibited from murder? What is the deal there? So the idea is, remember your Tzelem Elokim. The problem of the Dor HaMabul is the fact that they had lost their Tzelem Elokim. They were acting like a bunch of animals. And if God, like when God wants to iterate just how important it is that you understand that you're not animals, God not only gives you permission to kill animals, but he gives us permission to kill them and to eat them. And in that same section, he says, you're allowed to kill and eat animals. But don't go too far. Don't think that people are animals. because if you start killing people, then you're allowed to be killed. There's a very big difference between animals and people. And the reason why that needs to be dealt with is because before we were not allowed to kill animals to eat them. Now why? Because look, the animals, there is a certain madrigas to them. There's a specialness to killing animals. We still feel this today. There's something wrong about killing animals and eating them. But the thing is, God realized, and this is conveyed through the Torah, that there's a danger to not killing and eating animals. That is to say, it'd be like, you know, what makes us better than animals that should allow us to eat them? And that's good. But then it could be like, okay, but how are we any different than animals? And in fact, maybe we should be a bit more like animals. And that's where we start to see people slip and eventually hit where we become like the Dor HaMabul. And that's why there's this specific injunction, right? Or rather, sorry, this injunction was actually misunderstood. This injunction against eating animals had to be wiped away because it's true. Maybe it isn't ideal to eat animals, but if there's a prohibition against eating animals, then it might slide into something much more serious and much more severe. And that is to say, we'll lose ourselves in Elohim. And that's why those two things go together. You are allowed to kill and eat animals, but just to make sure the idea is still conveyed, you're not allowed to kill people. And if you do kill people, you will be killed in turn. We'll leave it there. Shabbat Shalom.